It is a pleasure to be with you, as always. I appreciate seeing so many of you here today, and I hope that many others a little farther up the hill will see many of you today. I know you're going to be talking to your legislators. This is a great place for you to be, to try and keep business out of your way so you can get about the business of doing business, which is what we want you to do. I am a former business owner, small law firm, and dealt with the B-poll tax and counting up the value of every, stupid little desk or whatever you've got, for personal property taxes and all the rest, and the various rules that various localities lay on top of you. I have also, as part of my legal career prior to being Attorney General, I basically was an outsourced general counsel to small and mid-sized companies. So I have an awful lot of time spent dealing with your issues, both domestically and internationally. That's why I got that master's in international transactions, because I was doing some. And it is a community I've been immersed in for quite some time. As Attorney General, moving from the Senate to the Attorney General's office, I also became an agency head. I am the head of the Department of Law. And in that capacity, we've made some changes internally that would be pretty boring on a political pamphlet, what have you. But for those of you who run your businesses, you understand the value of establishing a good corporate culture, a productive, entrepreneurial, aggressive corporate culture where people are incentivized to perform and rewarded for good work. There are people in your offices, just like there are in mine, who carry more water than others. And that's okay. There are lots of different reasons for that. But they should be, I believe, should be rewarded accordingly. And so we've gone to a merit-based system for salary increases when we can accomplish them, and bonuses. There have been no across-the-board salary increases prior to my arrival for 3 years, and for the 2 years thereafter. We're going to see a bonus this past year, I guess. It was the first time there was across-the-board hikes in 5 or 6 years. I'm from Northern Virginia. I grew up there. I still live up there. It's a little different than our view of the federal government and those government employees. God bless them. A lot of them live in Virginia. We're glad to have them. But our state employees do a great job. Many of them do a spectacular job for fairly strained wages. And that's not inappropriate when the rest of our economy is strained. I understand the challenging economic times that we're in. We've been in for some time. And every year in office, I have had a smaller general fund appropriation than when I arrived. And when I leave a year from now, I expect that the general fund appropriation for my office will still be smaller than the day I arrived. So in those parts of my office, we have had to be tightening our belts just like everyone else. Yet like you, we're trying to do more with less. In another area of our office, fighting healthcare fraud, Medicaid fraud in particular, which is enormous and helps drive up the cost of healthcare and health insurance for all of us. We have returned more than $80 million to the general fund since 2010, with millions more to come. We are the best state at fighting healthcare fraud in the United States of America, bar none. Last year, we had the largest resolution of a healthcare fraud case investigated by a state in the history of the United States. It was $1.5 billion against Abbott Pharmaceuticals, breaking Virginia's record of about $635 million. So we're number one and number two by that measure now. And that's how good that unit is. We do this, one, because we're responsible for these tax dollars. And two, these aren't just ordinary tax dollars. These are the limited number of dollars that we've set aside to provide health care for families with children who cannot otherwise afford this health care. So this isn't just stealing from the till, it's stealing from that till. And that's pretty motivating for me and for the folks in my office. And they're very, very good at what they do. We sat down when I arrived within 2 weeks and wrote a business plan for that section. We have been executing it spectacularly well, sufficiently so that actually later today, my folks will be on a conference call with Florida's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. This is the second state we have helped essentially reinvent themselves to help them be better at fighting healthcare fraud. We've also improved Virginia's ability to fight human trafficking. This is new to the Attorney General's office under my tenure. I was the first one in the General Assembly to start going after this problem. And Lee mentioned that while I'm a frugal person when it comes to government, I do believe that we have a role helping those who, through no fault of their own, can't help themselves, particularly those who are victims of crime. We have been working across the Commonwealth with federal, state, and local law enforcement and social workers, people like victims' rights advocates and coordinators, to help Virginia do a better job of fighting human trafficking. It's here, folks, and it's the fastest growing crime in the world, including in the United States of America. We've had a number of very successful prosecutions, and those continue on, and we're growing. Unfortunately, several of these areas, in economic terms, there's high demand, and that's unfortunate. Healthcare fraud, human trafficking. But when we have that situation, we turn what resources we have to attack it, and we've been doing that very aggressively. We continue to prosecute gangs in Virginia, the #1 violent crime threat in Virginia, by far, and getting them off the streets. In the first 7 months of 2012 alone, 17 defendants received more than 359 years of total jail time from prosecutions just with the Attorney General's office. This does not count your local Commonwealth's attorney and the efforts that we make to aid them in their jobs fighting gangs. We also do a lot of prevention. I spend a lot of time in schools talking to kids, and we've put some resources into some really outstanding deterrence tools for children. So if you belong to a boys club, girls club, if you're on one of those boards, we have tools for you to use, and they are effective. They're award-winning. So we fight it on both ends. Try to keep them from going in the gangs, but if they make that choice, we hammer them. And so carrot and stick. We prefer carrots, but we have sticks, and they're there to be used. So we've also focused on prosecuting child pornographers. This may sound sort of transactional. Anybody would be supportive of going after people who play some role, even in the supply and demand chain, for victimizing children. But you may not know that it's hard to nail down the exact number. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of people who consume significant amounts of child pornography will act out on a child. They will at least attempt to actually victimize a child in the real world. This is statistically one of the best, probably the best way that we can prevent future victimization. And we have now, I believe, taken more child pornography images off the internet than anyone in history in Virginia. We have had more prosecutions in the last 2 years than any other 2-year period in the history of Virginia. And we're now averaging about 2 to 3 convictions per month in this area. And some of these people aren't just downloading and passing along and distributing this material. Some of them are finding the children and creating the material as well. And needless to say, we have very little tolerance for that, as you might expect. I just came this morning from a hearing where I was advocating for the restoration of voting rights for some nonviolent felons. I believe that for some people we convict of crimes, the punishments ought not be permanent as they are in Virginia in felonies. For sexual predators of children, lock them up and throw away the key. That's why we have jails, as far as I'm concerned. Public safety initiatives and economic growth do go hand in hand. People have to feel safe in their community before they're going to invest in that community, before they're going to plant roots in that community, before they're going to try to grow a business in that community. And we try to help make Virginia safer for everyone in Virginia, those who live here and those who visit and do business here. And I know that a difficult economy also puts tremendous stress and pressure on businesses simply to stay afloat. And the last thing you need is government laying more burdens on your back. And that's one thing that we have tried very hard as the attorney in the Attorney General's office to resist. You know, most people run for Attorney General. For those of you who've paid attention to state politics for a while, you can remember top cop, top cop, top cop. I didn't run as top cop. I got news for you. The Attorney General is not the top cop. The governor is. The state police works for the governor. It is still the case, even as the Attorney General for 8 million people here in Virginia, that lawyers advise and clients decide. And that also goes for the state police, one of my clients. So while others before me for years, Democrat and Republican, have run with the notion of tough on crime, top cop, I don't cede tough on crime to anybody. But I recognize the necessity of engaging deeply in preserving Virginia's economy and economic opportunity in Virginia. We are a great place to do business, to raise a family. And that's what attorneys generals ought to focus on, improving and protecting. And unfortunately, during my tenure, some of that protection has been against the federal government. Lee noted a few of those cases. I'll touch on them in a moment. But I've been fighting to keep the field clear for you all as best I can ever since I became Attorney General. We've had 2 cases against the EPA, which I refer to as the Employment Prevention Agency, because they're so good at that. First off, shortly after I was sworn in, we began fighting the EPA's illegal and decidedly unproven regulation of carbon dioxide emission as a pollutant, along with 5 other greenhouse gases. Now, just for those of you who come in for Lobby Day and blissfully don't pay too close attention to the details of some of these things, about 15 states are involved in that case. It is still ongoing. 4 of the attorneys general who got in that case initially are Democrats. This is not just a Republican thing. This is destructive of many states' economic opportunities, and it's illegal. I don't care whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Vegetarian. It doesn't matter. The law is the same for everyone, including the EPA. If unchallenged, this regulatory scheme will have the ability to shut down a certain portion of our manufacturing. And I don't know if you've read recently about smog in Beijing, but these undertakings don't move from Virginia to North Carolina. I want to beat North Carolina, but if Virginia can't have it, I do want it to stay in America, right? Well, this kind of regulatory scheme pushes manufacturing outside of this country. It sends it elsewhere, to places where they do not care about the environment. And we can all debate the balance between economic opportunity and environmental stewardship. I believe in environmental stewardship, and as AG, I'm partly responsible for that. But we need to strike that balance. When we overdo it, when the EPA overdoes it, we shove those economic opportunities into other countries. And we need to stop doing that. As best I can, when that is going on an illegal basis, we fight back. That doesn't mean every regulation you don't like we sue over. We only sue when they break the law. Elections have consequences, and one of the consequences is the regulatory structure that we live with. This is giving the EPA, it's moving the direction of giving them unprecedented reach in our economy. The costs are extraordinary, especially for those of you in Southside, Southwest, and Western Virginia where you have a higher proportion of coal-fired electricity. Your cost of doing business is going up faster because of this regulatory scheme, and we're fighting it as best we can. And it is interesting to note, and I want everybody to take this thought away with you, because it's, again, it's not Republican, it isn't Democrat, it's just economics. The people hurt first and the people hurt worst by this kind of regulatory overburdening are the poor. Their opportunities go away first, they're hurt first, and they have the least opportunity, the least ability to be flexible in adjusting to the burdens that fall on them. Take Southwest Virginia, coal. Coal is not a politically correct thing to get up and defend. Well, I would challenge any of you who aren't from Southwest Virginia to take a little drive down there. And you go find yourself another industry that can replace it down there for me. And if you can't, you might want to talk to some of the folks down there who are dependent on it. You go get yourself a pizza at the pizza parlor. That's a coal job. No coal mine, no pizza parlor. Please keep in mind not just the impact on business, but the ripple effect on the poorest people in Virginia of this sort of regulatory burden. I do. I think about those people a great deal. Again, it's very motivating for me. But people don't always make that connection. And the folks who are burdened by it do. They've started to, because the burdens have gotten so bad. Now, speaking of electricity, I also represent consumers, citizens, directly in electricity rate cases with APCO and Dominion, who between them have about 3 million customers in Virginia. We continue to win, over the course of my time as AG, hundreds of millions of dollars in rate reductions, or at least avoiding increases. We've gotten both, while leaving enough room for the utilities to earn adequate returns to provide reliable and abundant electricity to Virginia households and businesses. This is a critical element of our competitiveness across state lines. Now, I talked about America versus the world. This is an example of how state law and state policy, and an attorney general who will be aggressive in this area, helps us be more economically competitive. Right now, we're hopefully finishing up negotiations of adjusting the regulation law governing electricity rates in Virginia. It is the first major change in this area since the 2007 re-regulation of electricity. We found several areas that do not work, distinctly to y'all's disadvantage, and if unchanged would cost Dominion and APCO customers approximately $1 billion in higher rates or higher potential rates between now and 2025. And we believe that we have accomplished a compromise. Don't hold me to these numbers exactly, but where we will get rid of at least 60 and perhaps more higher percent of those costs that we don't believe come with any benefit to you. And we will therefore make Virginia more economically competitive compared to our sister states. That's something I've focused a great deal on. I have an energy background, a bit of it as a lawyer, that's something I've engaged in pretty deeply, in addition to things like healthcare fraud and some other areas. We just won another case against the EPA's illegal overreach. Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, where I grew up, was our co-plaintiff, and this was a water case. The EPA was trying to treat water in the same manner it would treat a pollutant under the Clean Water Act. Interestingly enough, trying to regulate water under the Clean Water Act. Now, the name is sort of a giveaway here of this act. The idea is to keep water clean. And so regulating it, well, and the judge agreed, was silly. That isn't the word he used in his order, but we did win that case. If you live in Fairfax County, that case was about a $250 million case to you. It was $70 million for VDOT. That's for one creek. One creek. This was an experimental attempt on their part. They had never tried to regulate water as a way to get at another pollutant, in this case sediment, on the bottom of the creek. If they had been able to do this, they would have brought economic development in many areas of Virginia and the United States to a screeching halt. They'd have had a much bigger seat at the table for land use, and that would not be a good thing for our economy or our country. We've also fought to preserve Virginia's right to work status. The National Labor Relations Board has frequently overreached. They seem to be systematically doing this, and where it's appropriate, we have been stepping forward to push back. For instance, in the Boeing case, I helped organize the state opposition to that with South Carolina's Attorney General Alan Wilson. We were the first state to fight against the federal health care law, the unconstitutional aspects of it, and we won our main legal argument, but the law still stands. I do support not setting up a state health care exchange, thereby avoiding, in our view, $2,000 to $3,000 potential penalties per employee per year for businesses that have 50 or more employees that fall under that act. That's an enormous amount of money. It's incalculable. I don't even know how much is at stake there. There will be more, unfortunately, legal fights there to come because of the lack of clarity with which that law was written. It is a tremendous, tremendous burden. I understand that, and I know price spikes are coming at the end of the year in the health insurance market because of it, unfortunately. As long as the federal government keeps overstepping these boundaries, legal boundaries, again, we don't sue because we don't like the policy. That's what elections are for. Only when they break the law do we step in and sue on your behalf, on the behalf of Virginia. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, I promised in my campaign that I would push back. I just didn't expect so many opportunities to keep that campaign promise. Here in Virginia, I am glad you're here. I'm particularly happy with the centerpiece, what I think is the centerpiece of your legislative agenda, legal reform. Now, obviously you've heard I've done some litigation. I've actually argued some cases. I argued the EPA case, the water case, in court personally. And when I was in the state Senate, I put in a bill to establish summary judgment in a meaningful way in Virginia, which means including the use of depositions as what's available to judges when they're considering summary judgment motions. So I'm a tort reform trial lawyer, if you will, which puts me on the Endangered Species Act, I suppose. But it is what it is. I'm glad you all are pursuing that. That's a hard road to hoe. It is important reforms. Virginia is good in terms of its legal environment, its litigation environment. But this is a good example of where there's room for improvement. The non-suit reform, summary judgment is the granddaddy of them all. It is the biggest one of them all. To the extent you can help move the ball forward on that, I know the Speaker is supportive of that, but everybody isn't. So that's why it's so important for you all to be here. I appreciate, again, your efforts in this area. Wish you all the success in the world. My office has appeared and spoken favorably on behalf of summary judgment reform in particular, and we'll continue to support you in those efforts.